Yo, today we're talking all things raid sections. Ever since raid sections launched, it's always been my preferred way of playstyle for UKF, and recently I started grinding them exclusively with the goal to reach rank 1. I managed to pull this off, and the build and strategy I used is what we're focusing on in this very guide. So, once you load into the game, you immediately pick the tactical support commander. However, raid sections start on their cooldown, so you can't immediately call them in. This means your first unit to build should be one accessible in tier 0. And those options are of course the Vickers HMG, the Royal Engineer Squad or the UC. I initially tried going the UC first, as I thought that would add to the strength to the raid sections later on. However, it usually ends up not being that worthwhile as a first unit. Generally, I would say the UC shines the most if you can use it as a supporting vehicle. And it gets so much better with the Vickers upgrade that using it before getting the upgrade feels quite bad. The Vickers I did also consider, however, because of the aggressive nature of this build, I would say the Royal Engineer here is the optimal pick. The Engineer works great because later you're going to need one anyway for repairing vehicles, as well as sweeping mines. And getting one early on means you can wire green cover, plant early mines, as well as use them as a hammer while your sections remain the anvil. Following that Royal Engineer up, you immediately grab 3 raid sections, which is such a huge map presence in terms of infantry that your opponent will struggle if you play it aggressively. Now these 5 units will be the backbone of your army for quite some time, and I had many games on my grind where I got nothing else until I hit the Centaur, which is the main goal of this very build. Basically, the raid sections carries the Centaur, and the Centaur carries the raid section, and they work really nice together. Now, if we take a look at the raid section, they come equipped with a Molotov after unlocking the company command post, as well as getting a sprint. This makes them very well equipped to deal with Axis defensive positions, as you can sprint for flanks and throw those Molotovs to disrupt machine guns, garrisons or cover. At Vet 1 they also get a mine, which is insanely strong on normal infantry. Now you might be aware that Rifleman also has mines available to them from commanders, but the planting speed of the Rifleman has been nerfed in such a way that it's quite often ineffective spending time planting mines with them. But raid sections don't suffer from the same issue. They plant their mines twice as fast, and the mine planting speed is not dependent on model counts, meaning one model actually plants twice as fast as 5 Rifleman models. This is really huge, as once your raid sections get Vet 1, you can immediately plant a mine after winning an engagement, no matter what health or number of models you have on your squad. And because of the speed of this raid sections plant, you can usually end up finishing the mines before your opponent shows up. You can also do this on every point that you grab, and once your opponent starts stepping on a few of these, he will be forced to play very cautiously, using his sweeper when grabbing points, which will slow him down in the peripheral engagements on the map. This gives you a really strong map control, and thus the most important milestone with this build is reaching Vet 1 with your squads, preferably taking squads with Vet 0 squads, while your Vet 1 squads are capturing points and planting mines. Now, the raid sections can also be upgraded with the weapon racks for UKF, of course, and this gives you the option of equipping them with 2 Vickers, 2 Brents or 2 Piets. Now, the Vickers is currently bugged, meaning it deals almost no damage on the move. Meanwhile, grabbing anti-tank weapons on mainline infantry is in general really bad, as it handicaps them versus infantry, while also usually proving to be inefficient anti-tank. So that means the only real viable option here is to pick up the Brents, as they become slightly better M19 riflemen. However, I will say, in all my games, every single one of them in this grind, I never once did this, as the strategy doesn't really fit the upgrades. You know, upgrades are long-term investments, and this build will aim to obtain advantages early to then snowball into a winning position, and the upgrades really don't fit here. This is also way easier done by spending your munitions on off maps from, say, the HQ upgrade that you get with the commander, or from using abilities such as the mines, sprints, molotovs, etc. And thus I would recommend trying to use these abilities to their optimal potential instead of floating munitions and grabbing brands. Now, after you get your free raid sections, you are going to want to upgrade the company command post that unlocks said sprint and molotov. Following this, your aim is to hit 2 command points and use the airdrop, courtesy of the same commander of course. Now the airdrop is really powerful, as it gives you heals, as well as an 80 gun versus your opponent's early vehicle that will generally hit around this time. And you also get a mortar, which actually is really good for this build. Using the smoke to make charges and close in your opponent's cutoffs fits really nicely with the way you play. Once you charge through the smoke, you can drop some molotovs to force away any defenders. And once they're pushed away, you can easily continue dropping smoke while planting mines with whatever raid sections remain after the push in the middle of your opponent's territory. So one of the very obvious strengths with the raid sections here is that you don't need any other upgrades. You don't need bolster, you don't need the grenade tech, as they don't benefit from any of it. It's also really favorable to even skip the AEC, since that's a lot of fuel otherwise spent on a vehicle that won't really help you snowball. Hence, after getting these units, you go straight for tier 4, getting as early timing as possible on the Centaur. Now the Centaur here is an amazing vehicle, as it outshines the Cromwell versus Infantry, and you will generally have a huge window versus the Panzer IV using this build. You not only have a cheaper teching path, skipping light vehicles and all the side techs, but your map control is generally going to be much better with the raid sections, faster capping speed, as well as the aggressive nature and early powerhouse of all your infantry, coupled with mines being everywhere. Thus, the Centaur timing can be as early as 8 minutes after the game starts, and I managed to pull this off extremely often. Even in my worst early game, where I'm getting completely destroyed and even losing units, I generally had the Centaur on the field at 11 minutes, which usually still buys you at least a 3-minute window versus a Panzer IV, and this window is something we're going to want to abuse. Now, in order to really max out the power you get from the window, I would say it's really important, once you get the Centaur, to make aggressive pushes. Best is if you can time the Centaur entering the battlefield together with a lot of infantry ready to go from your base sector. You generally only have one goal once the Centaur fails, and that is to find your opponent's anti-tank gun. No matter if it's a pack gun or a Raketen, there usually is one on the field, but there usually isn't 2 at this stage. It's simply a fact that most Axis players prefer to do one anti-tank gun before getting their medium, and hence if you can find it, it really doesn't matter if you get snared or not. So your goal is to basically make a suicide charge of the Centaur on top of the pack gun. Now this is so insanely strong, as your opponent simply won't have the means to kill the Centaur, and it can very often net you the win straight off the bat. Having infantry to follow up the Centaur usually ends up being the final nail in the coffin, destroying the 80 gun with a 6-pounder or simply stealing it, as well as of course grabbing the cutoffs and planting mines. Once this happens, this will mostly force your opponent into getting another 80 gun, which further delays their Panzer IV, and hence you can easily grab a second Centaur after the first one before expecting the Panzer IV. Now I will say that the games I lost with this build was mostly when my opponent managed to somewhat adapt to what I was doing, expecting the Centaur push around minute 10. Now the aim for the Axis player here is to do whatever means possible not to collapse or lose all their units, and to successfully stall reaching that Panzer IV. However, this can be extremely difficult to do using a single 80 gun versus an aggressive opponent, and thus, as the UKF player, borderline senseless aggression can even be favorable to passive play, as in the long run this would net you more wins. Now, in order to really find that first 80 gun, I would say it's best to try to simply remember where your opponent keeps it if you ever spot it. Remember that position and aim to reach there as fast as possible once the Centaur fields. This is generally going to be around your opponent's cutoff, and hence once the Centaur is fielded, that's where you're going. Now you can combine this push with a pre-fire smoke from the mortar, even though you have no clue where your opponent is, just to increase your chances of reaching it before getting hit by the 80 gun. You can also do some strange maneuvers, which is of course quite map dependent, coming in at the cutoff from a strange angle with the chance of your opponent having their 80 gun set up towards a different angle. If you manage to get lucky here, that usually wins you the game on the spot, as the tempo of this build is quite insane, forcing your opponent off the map, forcing him to queue a second 80 gun that usually ends up being alone again since you wiped the first one, which will force him into a third 80 gun, further delaying their Panzer IV, and meanwhile you're still just massing out Centaurs or Cromwells. Of course, once they're off the field after that first push with the Centaur, you can again spam the mines with the raid sections, capture the entire map while doing base inspections with the Centaur, or trying to force away enemy units that are on the peripheral points of the map. Now, if the game doesn't end here, which does happen sometimes when your opponent are very stubborn, I'd say it's nice to have the third unit being the Cromwell, but you can also attempt to, in some manners, transition into late game here, going straight for the Crocodile. Another option would be to use the Forward HQ ability, which I did use quite a few times, as it gets you a lot of off-map abilities that you can spend your munitions on. Getting the command vehicle once you start transitioning to late game is also really strong, as it gets you recon and buffs all your squads, and your prime targets to use the command vehicle on is usually first the Crocodile if you have one, and then the Centaurs, as the debuffs hit these vehicles the least. Follow-up units that you can build once you transition to late game can be a medic squad to get some extra healing, second engineer for some more repairs and sweepers, or a second 6-pounder. A second 6-pounder here would help your Centaur survive versus the P4 while you're stalling for the Crocodile. I will admit this did not happen often in my games, but if you're struggling with closing the games, this can be an option. However, my personal recommendation would be to watch your own replay if you lose a match to see where things went wrong. Now, could you have been more active, more aggressive, and done better micro execution in order to end the game? I can't answer that for you, but usually the answer is yes, even for my own games. So that was it for this off-meta build order. Now, if you did enjoy this, please hit that subscribe button, as I will be doing more guides like this, both for Company of Heroes 2 and for Company of Heroes 3. Now, if you have yet to pre-purchase CO3 and you are planning to do so, you can help me out by using the link down below in the description and using promo code ELPEN on checkout. This helps me directly by giving me a cut of the purchase. Thank you for watching.